During World War II, war was something soldiers experienced with their entire bodies. They marched across continents, slept in mud, and fought enemies they could see and hear. The battlefield was physical, crowded, and brutally visible. A frontline soldier relied on paper maps, radio messages, and what he could observe with his own eyes. Victory depended on numbers: more men, more tanks, more aircraft, more factories working around the clock. Today, war looks very different. A modern military operation may begin far from the battlefield, inside a command center filled with screens and sensors. Targets are tracked by satellites. Decisions are shaped by data, algorithms, and live digital feeds. In many cases, the people making life and death decisions are thousands of miles away from the physical conflict. The sounds of gunfire and explosions have been replaced by keyboard clicks and silent transmissions. This shift raises an important question. Technology has changed how wars are fought. Has it changed what war actually is? To understand modern conflict, we must first understand the world it evolved from. Because today's wars are not separate from World War II. They are built on its lessons, its failures, and its unfinished consequences. The air inside the mobile command center is thick with the sterile scent of ozone and recycled air, a sharp contrast to the humid, iron-rich stench of the world outside. Sergeant Elias Thorne stares not at a horizon of mud and steel, but at a high-definition monitor displaying a thermal ghost map of a city 600 miles away. On the screen, the world is rendered in shades of cold violet and searing white. He watches a heat signature, the warm glow of a running engine parked beside a crumbling apartment block. With a flick of his thumb on a plastic joystick, Thorne adjusts the gimbal of a drone hovering 18,000 feet above the target. There is no roar of engines, no whistle of falling lead. There is only the soft hum of the cooling fans in the server rack and the rhythmic tapping of a keyboard. Thorne isn't a pilot in the traditional sense. He is a technician of terminal outcomes. He presses a button, and on the screen, a small white crosshair centers over the glow. Seconds later, a silent flash of light erases the heat signature from the map. Thorne exhales, his eyes red from 18 hours of blue light exposure, and reaches for a lukewarm cup of synthetic coffee. This is the modern face of war, silent, surgical, and terrifyingly distant. It is a world where the killer and the killed may never breathe the same air, where the battlefield is a digital construct, and where the greatest weapon is not a bigger gun, but a faster algorithm. To understand how we arrived at this quiet digital slaughter, we must look back to a time when war was loud, heavy, and impossibly vast. We must travel back 80 years to the mud of the Ardennes, the black sands of Iwo Jima, and the scorched ruins of Stalingrad. In World War II, the battlefield was not a screen. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the chests of 16 million Americans and tens of millions more across the globe. It was an era of massed men, massed tanks, and massed industrial will. If the modern war is a scalpel, World War II was a sledgehammer wielded with both hands. It was the last great conflict of the industrial age, a time when the strength of a nation was measured in the number of tons of steel it could pour into the ocean or drop from the sky. The transition from that world of iron to our world of silicon is the story of the greatest shift in human conflict since the invention of gunpowder. In 1944, a soldier like Private Arthur Miller didn't have a drone to scout for him. His intelligence was a crumpled paper map, a pair of brass binoculars. In the terrifying necessity of sticking his head above a trench line to see if the Germans were still there, Miller wanted to destroy a tank. He couldn't do it from a trailer in Nevada. He had to crawl through the frozen slush of a Belgian hedgerow, his heart hammering against his ribs, clutching a bazooka that felt like a cold pipe of death. He lived in a world of industrial warfare where the sheer volume of fire was the primary metric of success. To capture a single hill, thousands of shells would be fired, turning the earth into a lunar landscape of craters and splinters. This was a war of large, visible armies moving in tectonic shifts across continents. You knew where the front line was because that was where the world was screaming. Today, the front line is everywhere and nowhere. It exists in the fiber optic cables under the Atlantic, in the satellites orbiting the Earth, and in the pocket of a civilian filming a troop convoy on a smartphone. The most glaring departure from the mid-20th century lies in the realm of technology and its relationship with precision. In World War II, precision bombing was a hopeful euphemism. To hit a single factory in Essen or a submarine pen in St. Nazaire, 1,000 B-17, flying fortresses would have to darken the sky, dropping tens of thousands of unguided dumb bombs in the hope that a handful would find their mark. The collateral damage was not a tragedy to be avoided. It was an inherent characteristic of the tool. Entire cities were leveled because the technology of the time simply was incapable of hitting a single building without hitting the entire zip code. Contrast this with the modern era, where a single missile can be guided through a specific window from a platform hundreds of miles away. We have traded the carpet bomb for the laser-guided bolt. This has changed the very geometry of war. In 1942, a general needed a division to take a bridge. Today, he needs a team of 4 and a satellite link. This shift in precision has fundamentally altered the economy of war. World War II was the ultimate test of industrial capacity. It was won in the factories of Detroit, the shipyards of Richmond, and the tractor plants of the Ural Mountains. The arsenal of democracy succeeded because it could produce more Shermans than the Germans could produce Tigers, and more pilots than the Japanese could train. It was a war of attrition where the side with the most smokestacks eventually crushed the side with the most skill. But modern warfare is no longer an industrial sprint. It is a technological marathon. We no longer build 50,000 fighter jets. We build 100, and each one costs as much as a small country's annual budget. The complexity of modern systems, stealth coatings, radar absorbot materials, microprocessors means that we can no longer simply ramp up production in the face of a crisis. If a modern carrier is sunk, it takes a decade to replace. In World War II, the US launched an escort carrier every few weeks. This makes modern military power incredibly potent, but also incredibly brittle. We have traded the resilience of the mass for the perfection of the few. Air power, once the terrifying newcomer of the 1940s, has evolved from a blunt instrument of terror into a persistent, invisible presence. In World War II, air superiority was something you fought for in desperate, swirling dogfights over the English Channel or the Pacific. It was a physical struggle of speed and altitude, of Spitfires and Messerschmitts dancing in the clouds. Today, air power is less about the pilot and more about the sensor. The modern ace is a computer system that can track 60 targets at once, firing missiles at enemies that are nothing more than a blip on a radar screen 50 miles away. The visceral, white-knuckle terror of the cockpit has been replaced by the cold, analytical management of a sensor suite. And then there are the drones. In World War II, a soldier could look up and see the enemy coming. Today, the drone is a persistent eye that never blinks, a predator that stays aloft for days, waiting for a single mistake. The psychological pressure of knowing you are being watched by an invisible god is a weight that Private Arthur Miller never had to carry. He feared the Stuka's siren, but he didn't fear the empty blue sky. The nature of intelligence has undergone an equally radical transformation. In the 1940s, intelligence was a human game of shadows. It was the Enigma codebreakers at Bletchley Park, the resistance fighters whispering in Parisian cafes, and the scouts crawling through the tall grass. It was slow, imperfect, and often arrived too late to change the outcome of a battle. Today, intelligence is a digital deluge. We are drowning in data signals, intelligence, imagery intelligence, social media feeds, and satellite telemetry. The challenge for a modern commander isn't getting information, it's filtering out the noise. We can see the heat signature of a campfire from space, but we still struggle to understand the intent of the man sitting beside it. In World War II, a general might wait days for a reconnaissance report. Today, he receives a live feed, but that feed can be a trap, a deep fake, or a carefully curated piece of misinformation. The speed of information has outpaced our ability to process it. It's leading to a new kind of friction where the biggest mistake is acting too quickly on data that is technically perfect but contextually wrong. This brings us to the speed of conflict. World War II moved at the pace of the internal combustion engine and the human foot. It was a war of campaigns that lasted months, of sieges that lasted years. There was a rhythm to it. Ebb and flow of seasons, of winter quarters and spring offensives. Modern war moves at the speed of light. A cyber attack can disable a nation's power grid in milliseconds. A hypersonic missile can cross a continent in minutes. The decision-making window for a leader has shrunk from days to seconds. This creates a terrifying pressure. Eisenhower had days to agonize over the weather for D-Day. In a modern nuclear or high-tech confrontation, a leader might have only 6 minutes to decide the fate of a civilization. This compression of time leaves no room for the slow, deliberative wisdom that once defined great statesmanship. It favors the reflex over the reflection. Despite these seismic shifts in technology and scale, the human element remains the most hauntingly familiar aspect of war. Whether in 1944 or 2026, the soldier in the dirt is still a creature of flesh and bone, prone to the same failures of the spirit. Fear is the great constant. It is the cold knot in the stomach as the sun goes down, the frantic prayer whispered into the collar of a uniform, and the sudden, irrational urge to run when the air begins to hum. Technology has changed how we kill, but it hasn't changed how we feel about dying. The psychological pressure on a modern soldier is perhaps even more insidious. Private Miller's trauma was born of the immediate, visceral horror of the battlefield. Sergeant Thorne's trauma is born of the moral injury of the long-distance kill-the-strange. Haunting dissonance of taking a life from a comfortable chair and then driving home to eat dinner with his family. The 1,000-yard stare has been replaced by a digital haunting, a ghost that follows the operator through the screen and into their dreams. Leadership, too, remains a flawed human enterprise. History is littered with the mistakes of generals who fell in love with their own maps, and the modern era is no different. In World War II, the hubris of the German High Command led them to believe they could conquer the Soviet Union before winter. Today, that same hubris manifests in the belief that precision can replace presence, or that technology can solve political problems that have existed for centuries. We still see leaders falling into the trap of the technological silver bullet, believing that a new drone or a better encryption will magically win a war without the need for sacrifice or strategy. The mistakes are the same, only the tools are different. A general in 1942 might misread a paper report. A general in 2026 might misread a digital dashboard. In both cases, the cost is measured in the lives of young men and women who pay for the errors of those far from the sound of the guns. The scale of soldiers has also shifted in a way that would baffle a veteran of the Great Crusade. World War II was a war of millions. It required the total mobilization of society. Every family had a son in uniform, every factory was making shells, and every citizen was a part of the war effort. Modern wars are fought by a tiny, professionalized warrior caste. Most people in the West today can go through an entire conflict without ever meeting someone who is actually fighting in it. War has become something that happens over there, a background noise on the news rather than a central fact of life. This creates a dangerous disconnect between the public and the reality of violence. When war is a mass experience, society is cautious about entering into it. When war is a high-tech specialty performed by a few, it becomes easier for politicians to see it as a policy option rather than a last resort. We have made war more efficient, but in doing so, we have made it less visible to the people in whose name it is fought. So what has truly changed? We have moved from a world where we had to destroy everything to kill something, to a world where we can kill anything without destroying everything. We have replaced the industrial army with the technological network. We have traded the front line for the global grid. We have made the sky an omnipresent eye and the spectrum an invisible battlefield. We have increased the speed of death while decreasing the number of people who have to see it happen. But beneath the layers of carbon fiber and the streams of code, the core of war remains as ancient and ugly as a sharpened stick. It is still about the imposition of will through violence. It is still about the failure of language and the triumph of the lizard brain. The soldiers of World War II would look at our drones and our satellites and think we were gods. They would see our ability to feed a soldier in the desert with fresh water and hot meals and think we had mastered the world. But then they would look into the eyes of a modern soldier returning from a tour in a gray zone conflict. They would see a familiar ghost. They would recognize the exhaustion, the cynicism, and the quiet, desperate realization that no matter how much the technology improves, the experience of war is always a subtraction, a taking away of innocence, of peace, and of humanity. As we stand on the threshold of an era defined by artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons, we are forced to confront a sobering reality. In World War II, the machine was an extension of the man. The tank went where the driver steered. The gun fired when the soldier pulled the trigger. In the wars of the future, the man may become the extension of the machine. We are moving toward a world where algorithms make the kill decisions, where the speed of battle is so fast that the human mind is a bottleneck to be bypassed. We are perfecting the art of war to such a degree that we may eventually remove ourselves from it entirely, leaving behind a self-sustaining cycle of digital destruction. The story of the transition from 1944 to today is not just a story of better gadgets. It is a story of how we have abstracted the most visceral human experience. We have turned the bloody, muddy reality of Silas Miller's foxhole into the clean, violet-tinted data points on Sergeant Vasco's screen. We have sanitized the act of killing, but we haven't eliminated the consequence. Craters are smaller now, but the holes left in families are just as deep. The maps are digital, but the blood they are drawn in is still red. World War II was the last war we understood with our hands, a war of heavy things moved by strong backs. Modern war is a war we understand with our minds, a war of light and logic, but both are fueled by the same dark impulses of the human heart. As we look at the quiet, high-tech battlefields of the 21st century, we see the legacy of the 20th century giants. We see the same fear, the same bravery, and the same tragic inability to find a better way to settle our differences. We have changed the scenery, the costumes, and the script, but the play remains the same. It is a tragedy in 5 acts, and we are currently in the middle of a scene we don't yet know how to end. The final difference between the world of the 1940s and our own is perhaps the most frightening of all. In 1945, the world looked at the mushroom clouds over Japan and realized that war had reached a point where it could destroy the species. That realization led to a period of restraint, a long peace between the great powers fueled by the sheer terror of total annihilation. But as we move into an era of limited high-tech conflicts, of cyber war and precision strikes, that fear is beginning to fade. We are starting to believe that war can be controlled, that it can be a tool of precision rather than a fire of mass destruction. We are forgetting the lesson that Silas Miller learned in the snow of the Ardennes, that once you let the monster out of the cage, no one, not the generals, not the scientists, and certainly not the politicians, can tell it when to stop eating. We have spent 80 years trying to make war look different, trying to make it smarter, faster, and cleaner. We have succeeded in the look, but we have failed in the essence. A drone strike in a distant desert is still a child without a father. A cyber attack on a hospital is still a patient without breath. We have improved the delivery system, but the package remains the same. As we look back at the millions who marched into the darkness of the 1940s, we have to ask ourselves if we have actually progressed, or if we have simply become more efficient at the one thing we should have outgrown centuries ago. The documentary of human conflict is a long, repetitive film. We see the same faces in different helmets, see the same ruins in different cities. We see the same flags being folded and handed to the same grieving mothers. The technology of World War II gave us the world we live in today, world of jet travel, computers, and global communication. But it also gave us the blueprint for the permanent battlefield, a world where the war never truly ends. It just changes its frequency. In the end, the soldier in the Ardennes and the operator in the Nevada trailer are linked by a single, terrifying thread. They are both participants in the greatest failure of human imagination, the belief that the next war will be the one that finally settles the score. We look at the differences between World War II and today, and we see a revolution in technology. But if we look closer, we see a stagnation in spirit. We are still the same people who sat in those trenches in 1916 and 1944. Just with better toys and a shorter attention span. If the soldiers of World War II could see us now, they wouldn't ask about our drones or our stealth jets. They wouldn't care about our satellites or our internet. They would look at the headlines of today, at the rising tensions and the familiar rhetoric of us versus them. And they would ask only one thing, look us in the eye with the weight of 40 million ghosts behind them. And they would ask, after everything we showed you, after the cities we burned and the oceans we filled with our dead, why do you still make the world look like a battlefield? The answer to that question isn't found in a manual or a line of code. It's found in the mirror. We have spent nearly a century changing the face of war, but we haven't spent a single day changing the heart of the warrior. And until we do, the documentary will keep playing, the screens will stay lit, and the mud will never truly dry. We are the architects of our own destruction, forever building a better cage, forever sharpening a smaller, more precise knife, and forever wondering why the world still bleeds. The ghosts of 1944 are not in the past. They are in the light of the screens we stare at every night, waiting for us to finally learn the lesson they paid for in blood. The question remains, hanging in the ionized air of the command center and the frozen mist of the forest. If we have finally perfected the art of seeing everything on the battlefield, why are we still so blind to the cost of being there?